My name is Marcus, and when my father-in-law cut my badge and my wife folded my life into boxes, they thought the story ended with me on the curb. They didn't see the part where silence does more work than shouting. Before any of that, I'd been at his company years before Elena ever crossed my path. My title read Creative Strategy Lead, which meant I ran the team that turned raw ideas into roadmaps. Marketing, research, and product could actually execute. My job was to point at a direction that didn't exist yet, back it with numbers, and get siloed departments to paddle in rhythm. The work hit. My name had gravity in rooms that used to feel too big. Presentations ended with action, not applause. I had no idea how temporary a reputation can be when it's housed in another man's building. One evening, the CEO hosted a thank you dinner at his home for our ideation unit, supposed to be food, a few toasts, and an early night. That's where Elena walked in. Presence first, beauty second, a confidence that didn't need to be announced. She treated me like a mind, not a title. She listened, asked layered questions, and didn't pretend to be bored with the parts that weren't glamorous. The connection felt like a conversation we'd paused years ago and were finally resuming. It wasn't going to be simple. Nothing in her orbit was. Her father had already pre-selected a match pedigree and last name arranged to buttress his own. I wasn't that. I understood the rules of rooms I didn't build. I told Elena I would walk away rather than become the wedge between a daughter and her father. She shook her head. "I'm not living a life arranged by anyone else," she said. "I love you. I'm not trading you for a table placement." Her father was cold and controlling, not foolish. Push too hard, lose the only daughter he knew the math. He agreed, not out of approval but fear of fracture. The wedding was spectacle guest list, like a business magazine. Politicians, industry chairs, press with long lenses. He played gracious host. His smile never climbed to his eyes when he shook my hand. As the lights dimmed on the last centerpiece, the temperature dropped further. I wasn't the groom anymore. I was the man who married into the brand tolerated in public, invisible in private. They don't say it out loud in families like that. They rely on temperature to do the talking. While the house cooled, the office heated in a different way. I kept my role, but the air inside it changed. Deadlines that bent reason. One more thing tasks that belonged to 3 other titles. Extra hands requested for projects after midnight. At first I told myself, pressure sharpens steel. Maybe he was testing capacity. In meetings, he dissected my strategy like it had been written on a napkin by someone else. Same frameworks that had driven wins now paraded like errors. The pattern said it plainly. This wasn't evaluation. It was erosion. I didn't carry it home. Elena was close with her father, and I wasn't interested in poisoning their evenings with my daylight. I assumed work that works would eventually force its way through the fog. So I tuned my days tighter, longer hours, cleaner decks, pitches with contingency within contingency. Projects built 2 steps ahead of schedule. The scoreboard agreed, campaigns over target, concepts that landed partners we hadn't been able to get on the phone before, internal systems that saved time and money. Wins became team efforts with no names attached. Stumbles, no matter how peripheral, found me in the subject line. This wasn't about performance, it was about perception. I was being quarantined from my own record. Elena, early on, was all the reasons I'd said yes, warm and quick. Teeth bared for me when rooms turned unfair. Then the edges shifted. One night she said, "Maybe you don't value me," like she'd already delivered the verdict and was just signing the transcript. She wasn't wrong that work had eaten my hours. Surviving her father's gauntlet had become a second job. I tried to reset, made time, made plans. She dodged events, committees, charitable boards with people she'd never named before. Her wardrobe drifted toward a new audience. Her calendar curated a different life. It felt less like gravity and more like a puppeteer. Her father's fingerprints rarely show, but his preferences do. He'd never liked me. Not our circle. and nobody spins poison into wisdom like a patriarch who treats people like chess. I had no proof, only a house that felt like 2 addresses and a wife whose attention stood elsewhere. One evening, Elena and I were in the kitchen. She scrolled through photos from another high society event, held up a few, laughed at a caption. The screen dimmed. I tapped to wake it. My finger swiped. A photo slid into view. Elena, lying on the chest of a man I knew too well, the executive who had positioned himself between me and every promotion, the one who questioned every plan like it fed him, the one her father used as a blunt instrument. She ripped the phone from my hand like it had heated to burn. Before I could say anything, she stood and left the room like I'd committed the offense. I followed, asked the only question that mattered. She deflected old photo, saved by mistake. I was imagining things. I always jumped to conclusions and kept the phone locked in her palm. I stood there while my reality was called fiction in the house I helped pay to run. That photo didn't just end something in our home, it decoded work. Of course, he'd blocked approvals, seeded rumors, staged little failures to make me look disconnected. He wasn't just trying to replace me at the office. He was in my bed on company time. I told no one. I disconnected from the expectation of being treated fairly and started preparing for the next move, like I already knew the punchline. I backed up every plan I'd architected, every framework I'd built, every deck with the bones of systems they didn't understand. They became encrypted folders and external drives with no keys but mine, and I stopped writing my smartest work where anyone else could find it. If they were going to take my chair, they weren't taking my mind. Then the drop. A flagship campaign I'd been steering leaked confidential strat docs and blueprints found themselves in headlines. Clients furious, partners embarrassed, a room full of fingers hunting for a face to point to. They chose mine. Careless, they said. Negligent, they suggested. The sabotage had an address inside the building. They weren't interested in maps. A week later, performance review, they said. I walked into a boardroom with an HR lead, Elena's father, the executive I'd just seen on my wife's screen, and a lawyer whose only job was to end the conversation cleanly. "We're terminating you, effective immediately," the head of HR recited like a ritual. I watched their mouths move. I didn't argue. They slid a severance packet across the table like that word could balance any ledger. I stepped out, dialed Elena to tell her the man she called Dad had done the predictable. No answer. Voicemail. Texted. Nothing. At home, the door opened to a display boxes by the entry with my clothes folded like returned rentals, shoes lined up like evidence. Elena stood in the hall with her arms crossed, no expression at all. "It's time for a fresh start," she said, handing me a glossy brochure listing shelters. The house had been a gift title in a company shell. With me out of the company, I was out of the roof. I didn't force words into a room that wasn't going to hold them. I picked up what was left of my life and left a place that had been a stage, not a home. Jobs die. Reputations, when they're smeared enough, spread like smoke. Marriages end with mercies, or without them. All 3 folded in a week. I sat in the center of the mess and counted what was still mine. The list fit on a napkin. Then the phone started ringing from unlisted numbers that belonged to competitors who knew the market better than they knew the gossip. They'd worked with me once, or they'd watched our campaigns move the needle, and they didn't buy the official version. They wanted a conversation. My termination came with a clause: no employment in the same industry, no consulting, no advising, a freezer built to keep me still. I read it twice and smiled at what it didn't say. They had locked me out of their buildings. They hadn't figured out how to lock me out of myself. You can forbid where a body sits. You can't forbid what a mind knows. I couldn't take a job in a competitor's chair. That didn't mean I couldn't sell architecture. I'd kept the bones of the systems I'd designed. I knew the engine under the hood because I'd forged the parts, and I'd stopped handing them my best months earlier. News travels strangely through an org. Soon, old teammates pinged me. "Hey, remember that projection model you showed us? Do you still have the adaptive campaign sketch? As if nostalgia would jog me past the obvious. They were fishing. The new guy didn't have the map. The house of cards was short a foundation. Then the call that mattered, a multinational out of the Netherlands with US operations, reaching through a third party. They didn't care about my former building's paperwork. They cared about what my work could do in theirs. We outlined terms that didn't pretend deliverables, timelines, walls against anyone else's claims. I sold them the frameworks, pipeline designs, and strategy systems that had made my old company look more innovative than it was. Modernized, hardened, and built to scale faster. When they deployed, the market shifted like tide. They didn't just compete, they consumed. Share doubled, then tripled. Clients moved, partners reversed direction. My old company couldn't keep pace with a race they used to lead. The money landed in my accounts with the calm of something earned. Millions for what they thought they'd fired. I got small again. No fixed address, just a bag and a schedule that moved. Amsterdam when I wanted clean lines and bikes. Tokyo when I wanted neon and precision. Cape Town when I wanted sea and distance. No morning stood up to judge me. No wife rationed attention to maximize punishment. No father-in-law asked for my brain and returned slights. Just quiet. Work when I chose it. And the feeling of a ribcage without a fist inside. As peace extended, their world curled in on itself. Emails arrived with tone shifts. First, collaboration opportunities. Then, misunderstandings happen. Then, please Marcus, the company needs you. Elena wants to talk. One message managed the sentence. It was never personal. Like that absolves premeditated harm. My inbox turned into a museum of remorse. I didn't schedule tours. Standing on this side of the line, here's what has turned into bone. Loyalty without boundaries is a credit card in someone else's wallet. They spend until the plastic melts. Don't let anyone shame you out of your instincts. Keeping the peace is a noble way to drown. Protect your value. Not everything you build belongs to people who don't know how to hold it. Revenge doesn't have to shout. Sometimes it's just your life getting very good while their consequences catch up. If you'd been me, would you have gone back when the apologies arrived with attachments, tried to fix it for a man who only respects leverage? Or would you do what I did, step away, turn the volume down, and let results say what arguments never could? They thought they ruined me. All they did was force me to level up where they couldn't reach.